Katie Sullivan wiped sweat from her forehead as she climbed out of the cave entrance. The heat from Terra Nova's twin suns beat down on her back, but she had gotten used to it years ago. Her clothes were torn and dirty from crawling through tight spaces all morning, mapping the underground tunnels that ran beneath the mining colony. She checked her scanner one more time. The readings showed dangerous gas pockets in Tunnel 7, just like she thought. The miners would have to find another way around or risk getting blown up. Katie made notes on her tablet and started walking back to the colony center. Terra Nova was not a kind world. The ground shook every few days from small earthquakes. Strange animals with too many teeth hunted at night. The air was thin and made newcomers sick for weeks. Most people who came here either left quickly or died trying to stay. But Katie had been born here 22 years ago, and this hard place was the only home she knew. Her father had been a miner until a cave collapse killed him when she was 12. Her mother had tried to leave the planet after that, but they did not have enough money for transport. So Katie learned to work early, doing small jobs around the colony. When she turned 18, she became a surveyor because she was good at finding safe paths through dangerous ground. The work was risky. Every week someone got hurt exploring new areas. Last month, 2 surveyors had fallen into a gas pit and never came back up. But Katie was careful and smart. She studied the ground patterns and listened to how the rock sounded when she tapped it. She knew when something was wrong before her machines did. As she walked toward the main settlement, something caught her eye in the sky. A bright spot was getting bigger, moving too fast to be one of their cargo ships. Katie stopped and watched as the object grew larger. It was smooth and white, shaped like a giant teardrop. No human ship looked like that. Other colonists had noticed too. People came out of buildings and pointed up at the sky. Children ran between the adults asking questions. Katie heard someone say it might be aliens, but she did not believe it. No one had ever seen aliens before, not in real life. The strange ship landed in the open area next to the colony center with no sound at all. It just settled down like a feather. The surface was so smooth it looked like polished stone. There were no windows or doors that Katie could see. Then a section of the hull simply faded away, like it turned into air. 3 figures walked out, and Katie knew right away they were not human. They were tall and thin, with skin that looked like crystal. Their heads were longer than human heads, and their eyes were huge and completely black. They wore long robes that seemed to move by themselves, even though there was no wind. The one in front had silver markings on his face that glowed softly. Colony Administrator Jim Blake hurried forward with 2 security guards. Blake was a good man, but not very brave. His hands shook as he approached the aliens. Katie could see he was trying to remember the first contact protocols they had learned in school. "Welcome to Terra Nova," Blake said in a voice that cracked a little. "I am Jim Blake, administrator of this colony. We come in peace." The lead alien stepped forward and looked down at Blake. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, not just from his mouth. "I am Veltar Moonwhisper, ambassador of the Zenthari Empire. Your species is new to us. We have come to learn about your capabilities and determine your place in our domain." The way he said "your place" made Katie feel cold inside. It did not sound like he was asking. It sounded like he was telling them what would happen. Blake nodded quickly. "Of course, Ambassador. We would be happy to share information about our colony and our people. Perhaps you would like to see our facilities." Veltar looked around at the gathered colonists. His black eyes seemed to see everything. Katie felt strange when his gaze passed over her, like cold fingers touching her mind. "First, we will demonstrate the natural order," Veltar said. "Your people must understand the power of the Zenthari, so there will be no confusion about your status." He walked past Blake toward the crowd of colonists. People stepped back as he approached, but Katie did not move. Something about the alien's tone made her angry. She had spent her whole life fighting this hard world, and she was not going to bow down to some stranger just because he had a fancy ship. Veltar stopped directly in front of her. Up close, she could see that his crystal skin had patterns that moved like flowing water. His eyes were completely black, with no white parts at all. "You will serve as an example," he said to Katie. When your people see you submit to Zenthari power, they will understand their place. Before Katie could answer, Veltar reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. His fingers were long and cold, and they seemed to dig into her skin even though they barely touched her. The moment he made contact, Katie felt something trying to push into her mind. It was like having someone else's thoughts forced into her head. She saw flashes of images that were not her own. Vast cities of crystal, armies kneeling before Zenthari leaders, other alien races working like slaves in mines and factories. The images were meant to scare her, to make her feel small and helpless. Katie could sense that this was how Veltar controlled other species. He would flood their minds with fear and visions of Zenthari power until they gave up and accepted defeat. But Katie had grown up on Terra Nova. She had crawled through collapsing caves while gas leaked around her. She had fought off pack hunters with nothing but a mining torch. She had watched friends die and kept working anyway. Fear was something she knew well, but it did not control her anymore. Instead of backing down from the mental invasion, Katie pushed back. She did not know how she did it, but she focused on her own memories and thoughts, building them into a wall against the aliens' power. She thought about every hard day she had survived, every time she had refused to quit when things got bad. Veltar's confident expression began to change. His glowing markings flickered and his grip on her shoulder tightened. Veltar had never felt anything like this before. For 300 years he had used his psychic abilities to control the minds of other species. The process was always the same: touch the subject, flood their consciousness with images of Zenthari superiority, and watch them collapse into submission. It had worked on the rock-eating Gorvani, the warrior Kelthans, even the telepathic Mirians. But this human female was different. Instead of her mind crumbling under his assault, it was fighting back. Not just resisting, but actually pushing his own psychic energy away from her and back toward him. The alien ambassador tried to increase his mental pressure, but Katie's thoughts were like trying to grab hot metal with bare hands. Every memory he touched burned him. He saw flashes of her life, crawling through caves that could collapse at any moment, working 18-hour days in dangerous conditions, losing people she cared about and continuing anyway. What shocked Veltar most was not the hardship this human had endured, but her attitude toward it. She did not see suffering as something to avoid or fear. To her, it was just part of life, something to work through and overcome. The concept was completely foreign to the Zenthari way of thinking. Katie felt the alien's mental grip weakening and pressed her advantage. She did not understand what was happening, but she could sense that her thoughts were somehow hurting him. So she focused harder on her memories, pushing them toward the connection between their minds. She thought about the time she was trapped in a cave for 3 days when she was 16. The entrance had collapsed during a quake, and she had only a small bottle of water and half a food bar. Instead of panicking, she had systematically explored every crack and crevice until she found a way out through a stream bed. When the rescue team finally reached the cave entrance, they found her climbing out on her own, dirty and tired but unbroken. Veltar staggered backward as the memory hit him. He experienced every moment of Katie's entrapment, felt her determination to survive, her refusal to give up even when the situation seemed hopeless. The intensity of human will was like acid eating through his carefully constructed mental defenses. The other Zenthari moved toward their ambassador with concern. In all their years of conquest, they had never seen Veltar show weakness during a mind-touch ceremony. The tall alien with blue markings, Captain Zephyr, reached out to steady his superior. "Ambassador, what is happening? Should we assist?" But Veltar could not answer. Katie's mental presence was spreading through his consciousness, like fire through dry wood. She was not trying to hurt him exactly, but her human thoughts were so different from Zenthari thinking that they were toxic to his psychic abilities. Katie watched the alien shake and stumble. She could see fear in his large black eyes for the first time since he had arrived. The silver markings on his face were flickering faster now, and his crystal skin seemed to be losing its glow. "Let go of me," she said quietly. But Veltar could not let go. The psychic connection that should have given him complete control over her mind had somehow reversed. Now he was trapped in contact with her thoughts, unable to break free from the link he had created. Katie realized the alien was stuck somehow. She could feel his panic through their mental connection. Part of her wanted to push harder and hurt him more, but that was not who she was. So instead, she tried a different approach. She stopped fighting against his mind and started showing him other memories. Not the hard times, but the good ones. She shared the feeling of finding a new safe route through the caves, the satisfaction of a job completed despite dangerous conditions, the way the colonists looked out for each other when things got bad. These gentler memories confused Veltar even more than the harsh ones. He had expected humans to be either afraid or angry when confronted with superior power. But Katie was showing him something else: contentment with a difficult life, pride in overcoming challenges, and loyalty to her community that had nothing to do with fear or hierarchy. The Zenthari Empire was built on the idea that strength meant dominance and that the weak should serve the strong. But in Katie's mind, Veltar saw a completely different definition of strength. To her, strength meant surviving hardship without losing your humanity. It meant helping others even when you had problems of your own. It meant never giving up, not because you wanted to dominate anyone, but because giving up was not acceptable. Colony Administrator Blake watched in amazement as the alien ambassador continued to shake and stumble. The other colonists had backed away, unsure what was happening but sensing that something had gone very wrong with the alien's demonstration of power. "Katie," Blake called out softly. "Are you all right?" She nodded without taking her eyes off. "Veltar." "I think so, but something is wrong with him." The truth was that everything was wrong with Veltar. His entire worldview was being torn apart by contact with a mind that operated on completely different principles. He had conquered dozens of species by breaking their will to resist, but Katie did not seem to have a breaking point. The harder he pushed, the harder she pushed back. And now his own psychic abilities were starting to turn against him. The mental energy he had directed at Katie was bouncing back at him, carrying with it all the strength and determination that made humans so dangerous to creatures who relied on fear and intimidation. Captain Zephyr tried to approach his superior, again, but Veltar held up a shaking hand to stop him. The ambassador could see the worry in his captain's expression, but he could not explain what was happening because he did not understand it himself. For the first time in his long life, Veltar was experiencing true helplessness, not the artificial helplessness that came from being overwhelmed by superior force, but the real thing. Being trapped in a situation that his training and experience had never prepared him for. Katie sensed his confusion and fear through their mental link. Despite everything, she felt a little sorry for him. He was clearly in pain and she did not like seeing anyone suffer, even someone who had tried to hurt her. "I do not want to fight you," she said aloud, "but I will not let you control me either." Her words reached Veltar through both his ears and their psychic connection. The simple honesty in her voice was another shock to his system. She was not trying to dominate him or prove her superiority. She just wanted him to leave her alone. This concept of wanting to be left alone, rather than wanting to conquer or be conquered, was something the Zenthari had never encountered before. Their entire society was based on hierarchy and control. The idea that someone might want to exist without either ruling others or being ruled was revolutionary. As Veltar struggled with these alien thoughts, his psychic abilities began to spiral out of control. The carefully maintained mental disciplines that had taken him centuries to master started to collapse under the influence of Katie's uncompromising human spirit. The silver markings on his face flickered rapidly now, and his breathing became quick and shallow. He was breaking down in a way that no Zenthari had ever broken down before, and his captain did not know how to help him. 3 sectors away, Jake Martinez was cleaning his rifle when the emergency signal came through. The communications officer on duty, Corporal Lisa Stone, ran into the weapons bay with her face pale and her hands shaking. "Commander, we have a Priority 1 message from Terra Nova Colony. First contact situation gone bad." Jake set down his weapon and followed Lisa to the command center. The message was short and encrypted, but the basic facts were clear enough. Aliens had arrived at the mining colony. They had tried to demonstrate their power by attacking a civilian mentally. Something had gone wrong, and now the situation was getting worse by the hour. Jake had spent 5 years studying intelligence reports about alien activity in the outer sectors. His unit, the 47th Special Operations Group, had been created specifically to deal with threats that regular military forces could not handle. They were 12 soldiers who specialized in impossible missions and never accepted defeat. The name Terra Nova meant something to Jake, though he had never been there. Every military officer in the sector knew about the colony and its people. They were tough, stubborn, and had a reputation for surviving things that would kill most humans. If aliens had picked that particular colony to make an example of, they had chosen poorly. Jake called his team together in the briefing room. They were a mix of veterans from different conflicts, brought together because they all shared one trait. They did not know how to quit. Sergeant Amy Clark had survived 3 tours in the asteroid wars. Lieutenant Ben Hayes had been the sole survivor of the Proxima Station massacre. Each of them had stories that would give normal people nightmares, but they wore their scars like badges of honor. "We have a situation," Jake began, activating the holographic display. "Aliens have made contact with Terra Nova colony. From what we can tell, they tried to use some kind of mind control on the colonists. It did not work the way they expected. The intelligence report was sparse on details, but it mentioned that a surveyor named Katie Sullivan had somehow resisted the alien's psychic attack. More importantly, she had apparently caused some kind of feedback that was affecting the alien ambassador." Sergeant Clark leaned forward. "Sir, what do we know about these aliens? Do we have any tactical information?" Jake pulled up the few sensor readings they had received. "They call themselves the Zenthari Empire. Long-range scans show they have advanced technology, but their ship is not heavily armed. Our intelligence suggests they prefer to conquer through intimidation and mind control rather than direct combat." Lieutenant Hayes studied the data with interest. "So they are used to dealing with species that give up easily. What happens when they meet humans who do not give up?" "That is what we are going to find out," Jake replied. "Load the Iron Wolf. We leave in 30 minutes. The Iron Wolf was not an impressive ship to look at. It was an old cargo freighter that Jake's unit had modified with military-grade shields and weapons. It looked like a piece of junk from the outside, which was exactly what they wanted. Enemies tended to underestimate it until the shooting started. As they prepared for departure, Jake reviewed everything he knew about Terra Nova. The colony had been established 25 years ago by miners looking for rare metals. The planet was harsh and dangerous with unstable geology and aggressive native wildlife. Only the toughest humans could survive there long term. The colonists had developed a culture based on self-reliance and mutual support. They helped each other through difficult times, but they expected everyone to carry their own weight. It was not a soft place, and it did not produce soft people. If the reports were accurate, one of these colonists had not only resisted alien mind control, but had somehow turned it back on her attacker. Jake found this fascinating rather than surprising. He had served alongside people from other hard-world colonies, and he knew they had a mental toughness that was difficult for outsiders to understand. The flight to Terra Nova would take 18 hours at maximum speed. As the Iron Wolf jumped into hyperspace, Jake gathered his team for tactical planning. They needed to be ready for any situation when they arrived. "The way I see it," Jake explained, "we have 2 possible scenarios. Either the aliens have taken control of the colony by now, or this Katie Sullivan is still holding them off somehow. If she is still fighting, we need to support her. If she's been defeated, we need to show these aliens what happens when they mess with human civilians." Sergeant Clark had been studying the intelligence reports during the flight. "Sir, there is something interesting in the communication logs. The alien ambassador tried to break this woman's mind, but instead she seems to be breaking his. The other aliens are requesting reinforcements." This information changed everything. If the Zenthari were calling for backup, it meant they were scared. Species that conquered through intimidation were usually not prepared to deal with serious resistance. Jake made a decision that would have seemed crazy to most military commanders. Instead of planning a rescue operation or a tactical withdrawal, He began preparing for a direct confrontation with the Zenthari fleet that was surely on its way. "Listen up," he told his team. "We are not going to Terra Nova to save the colonists. From what I can tell, they are doing fine on their own. We are going there to make sure the aliens understand what they are dealing with." The plan was simple and dangerous, which was exactly the kind of plan Jake's unit preferred. They would arrive at Terra Nova just as the Zenthari reinforcements showed up. Then Jake would challenge their leaders to single combat. It was a gamble, based on his analysis of alien psychology. Species that used fear and mind control as their primary weapons were often unprepared for direct physical confrontation. More importantly, they were used to dealing with opponents who fought to avoid losing, not opponents who fought to win no matter the cost. Lieutenant Hayes had worked with Jake long enough to understand his thinking. "Sir, you are betting that these aliens will accept a formal challenge because they are too arrogant to believe a human could beat them." "That is part of it," Jake agreed. "But I am also betting that what happened to their ambassador has shaken their confidence. If one untrained civilian can break their psychic abilities, what can a trained warrior do?" The truth was, Jake did not know if his plan would work. He had never faced aliens with psychic powers before, but he had spent years learning to function under mental pressure that would break most people. Combat had taught him to keep his mind clear and focused even when everything around him was chaos. More importantly, Jake understood something about human nature that the aliens apparently did not. Humans did not become weaker when they were threatened. They became more dangerous. As the Iron Wolf continued toward Terra Nova, Jake spent time preparing his mind for what was coming. He reviewed his combat experiences, focusing on the moments when he had refused to give up despite overwhelming odds. He thought about his team and his duty to protect human civilians from alien aggression. By the time they dropped out of hyperspace near Terra Nova, Jake was ready for whatever the Zenthari could throw at him. He had spent his entire military career learning to turn adversity into strength, and now he would find out if human determination was really stronger than alien psychic power. The sensor displays showed multiple alien ships in orbit around the planet, but they had not yet attacked the colony. That was a good sign. It meant Katie Sullivan was still holding the ambassador, and the other aliens were too confused or scared to take direct action. Jake opened a communication channel to the Zenthari fleet commander. It was time to make humanity's position clear. High Psychic Morden stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring down at the small human colony through the view screen. In 800 years of conquering lesser species, he had never encountered a situation like this. His most skilled ambassador was trapped in some kind of psychic feedback loop with a primitive human female, and none of his psychics could explain how it had happened. The reports from Captain Zephyr were disturbing and confusing. According to the captain, Ambassador Veltar had attempted a standard mind control demonstration and had somehow been overwhelmed by the human's mental resistance. The ambassador was still conscious, but appeared to be trapped in contact with the human's thoughts. Morden had brought 3 ships and 50 of his best psychic warriors to Terra Nova, expecting to find a colony in submission and an ambassador ready to report another successful conquest. Instead, he found chaos and questions that had no easy answers. "High Psychic," his communication officer reported. "We are receiving a transmission from an approaching human vessel. They are requesting permission to communicate directly with you." This was unexpected. Human reinforcements arriving so quickly suggested that this colony was more important than initial intelligence had indicated. Morden considered ordering his ships to destroy the approaching vessel, but curiosity made him hesitate. "Put them through," he commanded. The view screen changed to show the face of a human male. He was younger than Morden had expected, with short dark hair and calm eyes that showed no fear. Behind him, the human could see other humans moving with military precision. "I am Commander Jake Martinez of the Human Defense Corps," the man said without preamble. "I believe you have encountered some difficulties with our people." Morden studied the human commander with interest. Unlike the terrified reactions he was accustomed to from newly contacted species, this human seemed completely at ease despite being outnumbered and outgunned. "I am High Psychic Morden of the Zenthari Empire," he replied. "Your people have interfered with a legitimate diplomatic contact. This will not be tolerated." Jake smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. Diplomatic contact? From what I understand, your ambassador tried to assault one of our civilians with some kind of mental attack. That does not sound very diplomatic to me. The casual way the human discussed resisting Xanthari psychic abilities was another shock to Mordun's worldview. Every other species they had encountered treated Xanthari mental powers with fear and respect. This human talked about them like they were a minor inconvenience. Your primitive understanding of proper protocols is not our concern, Mordun said, trying to regain control of the conversation. Your colony will submit to Xanthari authority or be destroyed. Jake's expression did not change. I have a different proposal. Single combat between you and me. If you win, humanity will consider joining your empire. If I win, you leave human space and never come back. The audacity of the suggestion left Mordun speechless for a moment. No conquered species had ever proposed single combat with a high psychic. The very idea was absurd. You cannot be serious, Mordun finally said. I am a master of psychic warfare with 8 centuries of experience. You are a primitive human with no mental abilities whatsoever. Maybe, Jake agreed. But your ambassador seemed pretty confident too, and from what I hear, our surveyor broke him without even trying. Maybe humans are not as primitive as you think. The reference to Veltar's condition struck home. Mordun still did not understand how a human had managed to overwhelm one of their most skilled psychics, but he could not deny that it had happened. On the planet's surface, Katie was starting to understand that her situation had become much bigger than just a personal confrontation. The alien ship had been joined by others, and now there was talk of human military forces on their way. Veltar was still connected to her mind, but the initial panic had faded into something more like exhaustion. She could feel his confusion and fear through their mental link, and despite everything, she felt sorry for him. He was clearly in pain, and the other aliens seemed unable to help him. This is not your fault, she said to him quietly. You did not know what would happen. The kindness in her voice was another shock to Veltar's system. He had tried to break her will and dominate her mind, yet she was showing him compassion. It was a concept that did not fit into Xanthari understanding of how the universe worked. Through their mental connection, Katie had learned quite a bit about Xanthari society. They were organized in strict hierarchies based on psychic ability. The strong commanded the weak, and everyone accepted their place in the order. They had built their entire civilization on the principle that mental power determined worth. But human society was different. Katie had grown up in a community where people were valued for their contributions and their character, not their special abilities. The strongest miner was not automatically the leader. The smartest engineer did, not rule over everyone else. They worked together because cooperation was more effective than domination. These different ways of thinking were what made the psychic contact so dangerous for Veltar. His mind was structured around concepts of hierarchy and control, but Katie's thoughts operated on principles of equality and mutual support. The conflict between these worldviews was literally tearing his consciousness apart. Administrator Blake had managed to contact the planetary government and request assistance, but he knew it would be hours before any help arrived. In the meantime, he was trying to manage a situation that was completely outside his experience. Katie, he called out, can you break the connection with the alien? We need to get you to safety. She shook her head without moving away from Veltar. I do not think he can let go. Something is keeping us linked together, and if I try to force it, I might hurt him badly. The other colonists had formed a protective circle around Katie and the alien ambassador. They did not understand what was happening, but they could see that their surveyor was holding her own against the alien somehow. That was good enough for them. Word had spread quickly through the colony about the confrontation. Katie Sullivan, the quiet young woman who mapped their cave systems and kept their miners safe, was facing down an alien invader with nothing but her own stubborn will. The story was already becoming legend. Up in orbit, high psychic Mordun was struggling with a decision he had never expected to face. The human commander's challenge was ridiculous and insulting, but it was also tactically sound. If Mordun could demonstrate his superiority over humanity's best warrior, it would break their spirit more effectively than any bombardment. More importantly, Morden needed to understand what had happened to Veltar. If humans possessed some unknown defense against Xanthari psychic abilities, the Empire needed to know about it before they encountered more human colonies. Very well, Morden finally said to Jake. I accept your challenge. But when I defeat you, your entire species will serve the Xanthari Empire as slaves. Jake nodded calmly. And when I defeat you, your people will tell everyone they meet that humans are not to be messed with. Deal? Deal, Morden replied, though he could not imagine any scenario in which the human could actually win. As Jake's ship approached the colony, both sides prepared for a confrontation that would determine humanity's future in the galaxy. Neither the aliens nor the humans fully understood what they were about to face, but both were confident in their own strength. The stage was set for a battle between two completely different ways of understanding power and strength. The Iron Wolf landed in Terra Nova's main square just as the twin suns reached their highest point in the sky. Jake Martinez stepped off his ship and looked around at the assembled colonists. These were his people, tough, weathered humans who had carved out a life on a world that tried to kill them every day. Katie Sullivan was easy to spot. She stood in the center of the square, still connected to the alien ambassador who shook and trembled beside her. The other aliens maintained a respectful distance, clearly afraid to interfere with whatever was happening between their leader and the human woman. Jake walked over to Katie and studied her face. She looked tired but not defeated. Her eyes were clear and focused, and she held herself with the quiet confidence that came from surviving hard places. I am Commander Jake Martinez, he said. How are you holding up? Katie managed a small smile. I have been better. This alien has been stuck in my head for hours now. I think his name is Veltar. Jake looked at the alien ambassador with professional interest. Veltar's crystal skin was flickering between different colors, and his breathing was quick and shallow. Whatever Katie had done to him, it had been effective. Can you maintain the connection for a while longer? Jake asked. I think so. Why? Jake explained about his challenge to the alien commander. Katie listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she nodded thoughtfully. So you want to face their leader in some kind of psychic duel? That is the plan. What can you tell me about how their mental abilities work? Katie considered the question carefully. Through her connection with Veltar, she had learned quite a bit about Xanthari psychic powers. They were based on projecting fear and overwhelming the target's will to resist. The aliens were used to dealing with species that would collapse under mental pressure. They try to flood your mind with scary images and feelings of helplessness, she explained. The idea is to make you so afraid that you just give up. But if you do not give up, if you push back instead, their own power starts working against them. This confirmed Jake's tactical assessment. The Xanthari were psychological bullies who relied on intimidation. When faced with someone who would not be intimidated, they did not know what to do. High Psychic Morden materialized in the square in a flash of silver light, flanked by two of his psychic warriors. He was even taller than his ambassador, with golden markings that pulsed across his crystal skin. His black eyes surveyed the humans with obvious disdain. I am High Psychic Morden, he announced. I have come to accept your pathetic challenge and demonstrate the futility of resistance to Xanthari power. Jake stepped forward to meet him. Up close, the alien was intimidating, over 7 feet tall with a presence that seemed to press down on everyone around him. But Jake had faced intimidating opponents before, and he knew that size and presence did not always translate to effectiveness in combat. The terms are simple, Jake said. Psychic duel between you and me. No weapons, no assistance from either side. Winner takes all. Morden looked down at the human commander with amusement. You realize that psychic combat is not simply a matter of mental strength? It requires abilities that your species does not possess. We will see about that, Jake replied calmly. The two combatants moved to the center of the square. The colonists backed away to give them space but remained close enough to watch. This was their fight too, and they wanted to see how it ended. Katie maintained her connection with Veltar but focused her attention on Jake. Through her link with the alien ambassador, She could sense what was about to happen. Morden would attempt to crush Jake's mind with overwhelming psychic force, expecting him to collapse like every other opponent the Zenthari had ever faced. Morden raised his hands and closed his eyes, gathering his power. The golden markings on his skin began to glow brighter, and the air around him seemed to shimmer with energy. When he opened his eyes again, they blazed with silver light. "Prepare to experience the full might of the Zenthari Empire," he said, and reached out to place his hands on Jake's head. The moment contact was made, Jake felt the alien's power slam into his consciousness like a hammer. Visions of Zenthari conquest flashed through his mind. Entire civilizations kneeling in submission, proud warrior races reduced to cowering slaves, vast fleets of ships spreading Zenthari dominion across the galaxy. But Jake had been preparing for this moment during his entire journey to Terra Nova. He had spent hours reviewing his worst memories, building his mental defenses around experiences that had already tested him to his limits. The alien's visions of conquest were frightening, but they were not more frightening than watching his friends die in combat or leading desperate missions against impossible odds. Instead of trying to block the alien's mental assault, Jake did what Katie had done. He pushed back. He focused on his own memories and began feeding them through the psychic connection. But where Katie had shared her experiences of survival and determination, Jake shared something more direct. The memories of a professional warrior who had never learned to accept defeat. Morden felt the human's memories flowing into his consciousness and was shocked by their intensity. This was not the chaotic resistance he had encountered from Veltar's reports. Jake's mind was organized and disciplined, structured around years of military training and combat experience. The human showed him battles in asteroid fields where humans had fought against overwhelming odds and won through tactics and determination. He shared memories of soldiers who had held impossible positions not because they were ordered to, but because their friends depended on them. Most disturbing of all, Jake showed him humans who had died fighting rather than surrender, choosing death over submission. These concepts were alien to Zenthari thinking. In their society, the weak submitted to the strong as a natural order. The idea of choosing death over surrender was not just foreign, it was incomprehensible. As the psychic duel continued, Jake began to understand the fundamental weakness in Zenthari psychology. They had built their entire civilization on the assumption that every intelligent species would choose survival over principle. When faced with overwhelming force, any rational being would submit rather than be destroyed. But humans were not always rational. Sometimes they chose to fight lost causes because fighting was the right thing to do. Sometimes they sacrificed themselves for others not because it made sense but because that was who they were. Jake pressed his advantage, sharing more memories of human courage and sacrifice. He showed Morden soldiers who had held their positions, while their comrades evacuated. He shared the story of a transport pilot who had flown into enemy fire to rescue wounded Marines, knowing it would probably kill him. Each memory was like a poison to Morden's psychic abilities. The Zenthari's power was based on fear and the desire for self-preservation. When applied to minds that could overcome fear and put others before themselves, it not only failed to work, but began to turn against its user. Morden tried desperately to break contact with Jake's mind, but found that he could not. Like his ambassador before him, he had become trapped in a psychic feedback loop created by human mental resistance. The other Zenthari warriors moved forward to help their commander, but Jake's team was ready for them. Sergeant Clark and Lieutenant Hayes stepped between the aliens and their leader, weapons drawn but not yet aimed. "This is single combat," Jake said without breaking his concentration. "Honor the agreement." Morden was beginning to understand what had happened to Veltar. The human mind was not just resistant to Zenthari psychic control, it was actively harmful to aliens who tried to use such abilities. Their own power was being reflected back at them, amplified by human determination and the refusal to submit. The duel reached its climax. Jake made a conscious decision to show mercy. He could have pushed harder and probably destroyed Morden's mind entirely, but that was not his goal. He wanted the Zenthari to understand human strength, not to annihilate them. Instead of increasing his mental pressure, Jake began to withdraw from the psychic connection gradually. As he did so, he left behind one final message, a clear image of what would happen if the Zenthari Empire ever threatened human civilians again. The message was simple and direct. Humanity would fight. They would not submit or negotiate or try to find compromise. They would fight with everything they had, and they would continue fighting until either they won or there were none of them left to fight. Morden collapsed to his knees as the connection finally broke. His golden markings flickered weakly, and his hands shook as he tried to process what had just happened. For the first time in 8 centuries, he had encountered a species that was genuinely more dangerous than the Zenthari Empire. Jake stepped back and looked down at the defeated alien commander. "I think we have an understanding now," he said quietly. Morden looked up at the human warrior with something approaching respect. "Your species is not what we expected." "No," Jake agreed. "We are not." The Zenthari fleet departed Terra Nova within the hour, taking their broken ambassador and humbled commander with them. Before they left, Morden broadcast a message to the Zenthari Empire that would change the course of galactic history. Humanity was not to be conquered or controlled. They were to be left alone. Katie Sullivan returned to her work as a geological surveyor, but her name became legend throughout human space. The woman who